Hello, welcome back to the Three-Handed Bandits channel. It's Nathan back with another breakdown for you today, unveiling our 11th team in our 2023 to 2024 preseason power rankings. And today, we're talking about the Detroit Lions. I think online, this has become the second team of a lot of people in the NFL community. Last year, they just narrowly missed the playoffs, and they're hoping that this year is the year that they can restore the roar under Dan Campbell and really have a shot of winning a Super Bowl in this weak NFC. Before we get into their coaching, their roster, their offseason, and everything, please like and subscribe and share this video with somebody that you care about. So yeah, obviously I am talking about the Detroit Lions. And I think this might be a team that I'm fairly in line with kind of the thoughts on this team. I might be slightly lower, but I still do think that this is going to be the team that wins the NFC North when the playoffs start come January. Let's go and talk about their offseason before we get into their roster. And they had a disappointing offseason. So obviously they had so much potential. And they just narrowly missed out on making the playoffs. And I just wish they did a little bit more for this team and for this roster, especially with their draft capital. So obviously, 2 first-round picks, including the a top 10 pick, they turned that into a running back and a linebacker, which in today's modern NFL landscape are becoming 2 of the least valuable positions on either side of the ball. And so I do think they drafted 2 people that are going to be fine players. I just wish that they had really targeted some positions that they have that aren't, perfect, and really gotten more bang with their buck than what they got. So let's kind of talk about their draft. So obviously, as I said, they drafted Jahmyr Gibbs and Jack Campbell, both in the first round, who I think are going to be good players, but they definitely could have done more with that, as well as drafting Hendon Hooker in the 3rd round, who I don't fully know if they had a reason to draft him, because I don't think he has the upside to really be a succession plan to Jared Goff. I think if he ends up developing and being a solid player when he's 27, 28, he's going to be, imagine, very similar to what Jared Goff is giving you, kind of best case scenario. And so I think those are 3 picks that just could have been used and utilized more efficiently, effectively, not only set this team up better for this season, but honestly, even in the long run. Besides that, though, I think free agency, they did a really good job bringing Marvin Jones to give him another wide receiver, just obviously because they're going to be without Jameson Williams for a couple games. Marvin Jones is okay at this point. He's not quite a player he used to be. And they bring in David Montgomery, who I do think is a underrated running back in this landscape of the NFL. But I imagine, he's going to be very similar to what Jamal Williams did for this team last year. And obviously, Jahmyr Gibbs is going to be replacing the DeAndre Swift role, who's a player who has talent, but they just did not seem to really like here. They also lose DJ Chark. So overall, for the skill positions, I think it's going to get better because they also bring in Sam Laporta. I imagine it'll be pretty similar. It does have the potential to get better. They lose Jamal Williams, DeAndre Swift, and they traded away TJ Hawkinson. And they draft, Laporta, Gibbs, and bring in Montgomery and Jones. So I imagine, it can get better. But definitely I feel like they could have handled that a little bit better. The offensive line, they bring in Graham Glasgow as they're losing Evan Brown, who's been okay, I guess. Graham Glasgow is just another one of these low-end kind of starting caliber linemen. On the defense, they really only lose Jeff Okudah, Armani Oruway, Mike Hughes, and Deshaun Elliott. Jeff Okudah did not really develop into the player that it seemed like he was going to be when he was drafted. Armani Oruway has not really been a great player. Mike Hughes has been a decent slot guy, but they did upgrade that position. And they also didn't really need Deshaun Elliott because they have a lot of good safeties. And so, as I said, on the back end, they bring in Cameron Sutton, who's a solid corner. CJ Gardner-Johnson, who's one of the better slot corners in the league, as well as Brian Branch, who has a very similar skill set to what CJ Gardner-Johnson gives you. So overall, I do think that free agency, they did well and made some smart signings. I just wish that they had attacked the draft just a little bit differently and gotten a little bit more value with their first couple of picks. And so now when we talk about coaching, I do think biggest thing that they did this offseason was not lose Ben Johnson. Um, Ben Johnson, I do think this is probably his last year being an offensive coordinator. Um, what he's done with this offense as the play caller, not only have they helped elevate some guys, but just the design of the plays, when the plays are called, just everything about this offense has been so dynamic, and part of that has been to him and his play calling. And so I do think that not losing him was a huge, huge aspect to this team. And obviously Dan Campbell up top as the main kind of CEO, kind of overseeing the organization, is one of the best culture guys in the NFL. What he's done to the culture of the Detroit Lions of all team is nothing short of amazing. It started off with ankle biting, but everybody here has bought in, wants to win. Even Ben Johnson probably could have left if he was able to find a way to, but he stayed. He wants to stick it out and really see how far this Detroit Lions team can go. And yeah, and so Aaron Glenn is also a guy that's had some promise. It came over from those New Orleans teams that had some really excellent defenses. And his defense started off slow, but did really kind of start picking it up towards the end of last year. And hopefully with a lot of the talent that they brought in, this defense is really going to finally start getting it figured out and not quite being a liability like it was some points, especially early on during the year. So overall, I do think we feel really good about the culture and the offensive coaching, and we just need Aaron Glenn to kind of prove and cement that he's a good defensive coach. But I mean, he easily could. But if things don't go well for this team, I do think that Aaron Glenn will end up being the scapegoat. And so now, as we transition to this offense, and we talk about Jared Goff. Jared Goff, the last couple of teams we've talked about, all the quarterbacks have been in this solid tier, and I don't think Jared Goff, Jared Goff is as well as very similar to those quarterbacks and in this tier as well. Obviously he did go very early in the draft because he does have a really excellent arm. However, athletically he is lacking a lot. And so can't always do a whole lot, extending and creating on his own. But when everything is going well, as I said with these other quarterbacks, he can play well in structure and make a lot of really good throws. It's just when things go wrong, how does he perform? Not always great. But when things are well blocked and wide receivers are open, he will be able to function and play within the structure of this offense and have at times a top 5 to top 10 offense. Behind him, you got Hendon Hooker and Teddy Bridgewater. I think Teddy Bridgewater has proved that he is not a starting caliber quarterback anymore. But I do still think he's definitely one of the better backups in the league. So if Jared Goff does go down for a game or two, he can step in and be solid. However, with him, it will limit a lot of what this offense can do, and this team will end up struggling if Goff goes down. As I said with Hendon Hooker, just a bit of a strange draft pick. Just because his timeline is so weird. Obviously, 25 years old being drafted. He probably got at least 2 more years of Jared Goff. So by the time that, Hendon Hooker is ready to go, is he going to be, 28? And then you're going to have to decide if you want to pay him or let him play. Like, it's just an interesting scenario. But, he's going to be redshirting this year more than likely anyways as he's coming back from the injury. So I imagine we won't really see him at all this year, but just a little bit of an interesting draft pick there. But overall, as I said, Jared Goff is definitely in the tier of the Daniel Joneses, Kirk Cousins, kind of decent mid-ish quarterbacks who you can win with, but you do need things around them to be going well in order to do that. And so now as we talk about this weaponry, on paper, it looks okay. But I do think Ben Johnson does a creative way of scheming them up. However, their best player is straight up going to be Among Us St. Brown. Really, really good slot wide receiver. Doesn't fully have the explosivity as someone like Cooper Kupp. So I don't ever think he's truly going to be considered an elite wide receiver. But he's good after the catch, good route runner, can find the soft spot in zones, can get open, has sure hands. And so he's a star wide receiver, and he's developed and is the primary ball mover for this team and is really good at it. But as I said, doesn't have the true long speed to ever be like what I think Cooper Kupp is. But, outside of Cooper Kupp is the best slot wide receiver in the league. So as I said with Marvin Jones, obviously they brought him in as Jameson Williams is going to be suspended for the start of the year. So at least that's going to give them just an NFL starting caliber wide receiver until he gets back. However, his skill set is very different than Jameson Williams. Jameson Williams has some insane speed, but last year missed almost all of last year because of his injury and came back very, very late, and now he's going to be suspended. So we really haven't gotten to see him, how he's going to look when he gets out there. But, last year he didn't do a whole lot. I think he had a handful of snaps, caught a touchdown. So, his speed's legit. And so hopefully when he comes in, he'll be able to hit the ground running, or at least be better, considering, he's had plenty of time to learn. So what are we going to get from him? We'll see. At the very least, I think you'll get a solid deep threat, but at some point we just need to see him on the field. Depth here is not great. Josh Reynolds is a very okay, bigger body caliber, wide receiver. And Khalif Raymond's kind of a shorter, kind of shifty, fast, kind of deep threat kind of slot option. And then Antoine Green also ends up making this team as a rookie. So overall, the wide receiver depth, we need to see what Jameson Williams is going to be like when he's healthy. And then we'll kind of be more excited about this offense, I think. But Amon-Ra St. Brown, Among Us St. Brown, at the very least, will be really productive until Jameson Williams get back. And then I think when Jameson Williams does get back, this offense is really going to hit their stride and start being uber productive. The running backs and tight end, I do think that Jahmyr Gibbs is going to come in right away and be a really good pass-catching running back. And I know a lot of people kind of compared him to Alvin Kamara because they see a running back with dreads that's a good pass catcher. He is not quite as thick, not quite as big as Alvin Kamara is, so I don't think he'll be quite as good of a runner. So imagine he'll have a very similar, Aaron Jones, DeAndre Swift-esque career of being a really good receiving back. But, he's elusive, shifty after the catch, can run routes, and overall is going to be a really good receiving option for this team, even if he's not the most productive runner. And then David Montgomery is just very adequate as a receiving back, can catch screens, do very simple stuff out of the backfield, but not the most explosive getting it out of the backfield. Sam Laporta looks like going to be their starting tight end. Was it worth trading away TJ Hawkinson for him? Probably not. But he's a guy who can come in, will at least be a solid kind of chain mover. But I'm not really expecting TJ Hawkinson or Mark Andrews or Travis Kelce from him. Depth-wise, they cut Craig Reynolds, but they end up bringing him back when they threw one of the Akwara brothers on IR. So as a third running back, he's a decent receiving back and can run the ball okay, but not expecting much from him. And then Brock Wright had a couple productive games last year, so as a tight end 2, he's solid. And James Mitchell as your tight end 3, you could do worse. So I do think this offense might struggle a little bit right off rip until Jameson Williams gets back. But once Jameson Williams does get back, I imagine that this offense, skill sets will work in tandem, and Ben Johnson will call up some really beautiful plays to get them working very well. And then these running backs is running as runners. I know a lot of people are targeting Jahmyr Gibbs very early, but this is going to be a much bigger split than I think people are anticipating. Last year, Jamal Williams had 17 rushing touchdowns. So clearly they're going to use David Montgomery. He's going to be the primary runner of the football. I do think Jahmyr Gibbs will be involved a lot in the passing game, but I would kind of just be wary about drafting him early just because I think it's going to be a much bigger split than a lot of people are anticipating. So, David Montgomery is a good running back, and they're not going to bring him in to not use him. So I imagine that David Montgomery is going to have a lot more of the receiving upside. Obviously, Jahmyr Gibbs does have more fantasy relevance, probably due to the fact that he is going to be, catching the ball. And so he does have a little bit of a higher ceiling, but I imagine David Montgomery will have a bit of a safer floor. For best ball, it would be interesting as a guy to have kind of stashed, just because there will probably be a couple of weeks where he gets 2 or 3 touchdowns, short rushing touchdowns. But in like traditional redraft leagues, I'm kind of just avoiding this situation just because, I imagine it's going to be, a split, and it's going to be kind of difficult. Like, oh, who's going to get the touchdown this week? So I would kind of just stay away from it and let somebody else make that mistake. But this offensive line is legit good. So not only do they have one of the best tackle duos in the league with Penei Sewell and Taylor Decker, they have one of the best centers in the league. And they have two very adequate guards. So we'll talk with Frank Ragnow because not much needs to be said about him. He is one of the handful of best offensive linemen, or at least interior offensive linemen in the league. Is an absolute beast as a run blocker, and he is a good pass blocker. He's not perfect, but he's very solid and can really move people in the running game. The two guards in Jonah Jackson, and currently they have Graham Glasgow starting. They bring in Hai Vitae a couple of years ago, and he was okay for him, and then missed all of last year. And so they have Graham Glasgow starting for now. I don't think that job is necessarily guaranteed. I think, they're similar players and both solid guards. So it'll be interesting to see which of them, if Hai Vitae is able to kind of take that job back over from Glasgow. But overall, I do think you'll get a solid play from that. And then Jonah Jackson is a really good run blocker, but is, the weakest pass blocker by far in this unit. And so at least with Frank Ragnow inside, that kind of helps protect him somewhat. One-on-one, he can get exposed, but he's a solid run blocker. Penei Sewell is also just an absolute people mover, and is pretty solid as a pass protector, can hold up, but definitely still has the potential to keep growing and to become kind of more of an elite tackle and be considered one of the best tackles in the league. And Taylor Decker is a very good tackle, is a rock and pass pro, and just, an okay run blocker, but you're not really worried about what he does. So overall, this is going to be one of the best offensive lines in the league, without a doubt. And, at least they have, one good backup lineman. The depth outside of Hai Vitae / Graham Glasgow isn't great. If they do have a couple injuries, this unit will start to struggle. But got 5 good starters, and no true weaknesses. And so overall, keeping Ben Johnson, I think, was huge for this team. So I do think this offense is still going to be really excellently, designed, and plays are going to be called very, very well. And so this is going to be a unit that I think is going to have some very explosive games, and really have one of the better offenses in the league, as long as everything goes well, and everyone's getting open. I will be worried, though, if Amon-Ra goes down, especially early, I would be worried how this offense looks, just because they don't have the most guaranteed dynamic playmakers. And so that's kind of where I wish they'd really taken some more shots in the draft. Maybe instead of getting Jack Campbell, let's get a Quentin Johnston or Jordan Addison, or just someone who can be in more of a number 1 wide receiver. They don't really need Jackson Smith and Jigba. They don't need 2 slot wide receivers. But I wish maybe in free agency they'd gone for like an Odell, or just get another adult veteran with some more upside in the building. But overall, I do think that this unit is going to be able to move the ball very well, and at times almost whenever they want to at ease. So yeah, it's going to be a good unit. Defensively, kind of 1 foot in, 1 foot out. So part of it is they started off quite poor last year, but they did kind of start figuring some things out. And part of it is because Aiden Hutchinson is a legit, really, really good player, and I imagine is in store for a pretty big year. He's a true 3-down lineman. Really bought into the culture. As a local kid, defend the run, but also is really excellent at getting after the quarterback. Kind of like a poor man's Nick Bosa. But I imagine he's in store for a really good year, and is going to develop and, be one of the tier 2 to tier 3 edge rushers in the league, as well as not being a liability in run defense. James Houston, who they have on the other side, is a very interesting player. He is strictly a pass rusher. He is a liability in run defense, but they're going to shelter him, and they don't really want him out there to defend the run, because he is really undersized. Because he's listed at 6'1", 245. He's listed as, he's almost a safety. He's a big safety at that point. And so he's not going to be able to defend the run. He just does not have the size to hold up in run defense. However, getting after the quarterback, he had 6 sacks and how many pressures? So he had 8 sacks and 17 pressures, which is a little bit unsustainable. But someone, like Max Crosby had, early in his career, had a lot of sack production with not a whole lot of pressures. But he graded out as an excellent pass rusher and not a whole lot of snaps. Really, really was a very excellent pass rusher. So it's going to be interesting to kind of see if he's able to, keep developing, and that wasn't kind of just some fluky, good games. But I mean, he seems like he could be a legit good pass rusher if he's only used as a pass rusher. Because as I said, he will not be able to run defend to save his life. But that's also why they got the likes of Charles Harris and the Aquara brothers. Julian Aquara is currently on IR, so we want to have him at first. But Charles Harris and Romeo Aquara are both two solid guys that can kind of rotate and at least defend the run a little bit better than James Houston does. Charles Harris is a little bit better at getting after the quarterback, but Romeo Aquara is a little bit of a safer run defender. It's gonna be interesting to kind of see what version of Romeo Aquara we do get though, because when he first got here, looking like he was going to be a piece for this team, and then got injured and kind of fell off the face of the planet. So it'll be interesting to kind of see what version of him we do end up getting, but at the very least, you'll have an adequate run defender. The interior unit is good, not great. John Kaminsky is a veteran that's kind of played a good amount of games in the NFL. He's a very adequate starter, defend the run and get after the quarterback at a serviceable level. Same thing with Isaiah Buggs. He's a good run defender, and as his technique and play strength kind of increases, could end up becoming a really good run stopper. Does have a little bit of rushing upside. And then Aleem McNeil has been a pretty decent pass rusher from the inside, and also the younger guy can kind of keep growing, and hopefully he's in store for another good year, especially if Aiden Hutchinson is going to break out for this team. I would not be surprised if that happens. Depth-wise on the interior, they have John Pascal, Broderick Martin, who they drafted, and Levi Onwuzurike. Onwuzurike has some upside after getting after the quarterback, but not a very good run defender at all. Broderick Martin's, okay, I guess. John Pascal is kind of one of these kind of hybrid players. Play a little DN, play a little edge, play a little interior, you know what I mean? And it's kind of just a worse version of John Kaminsky, because he can't quite get after the quarterback quite a good enough level, but he can at least come in and be serviceable against the run. So overall, this defensive line has some solid pieces. You have Aiden Hutchinson, who you feel pretty good about, but it's still not a proven unit. Aiden Hutchinson, if he has an okay year, and then teams kind of figure out James Houston, this defensive line can kind of get picked apart and gashed apart. There was times where people could almost run at will against this unit. So hopefully they're able to really kind of figure things out in the front part of this defense. The linebacking unit, they do have a pretty solid linebacking unit. So obviously I do think Jack Campbell's going to be just a solid player right off rip, but I feel like they A, could have waited to get him, or B, could have just gotten some better value. Obviously linebacker is not a super valuable position in the modern NFL, but as a rookie, he's going to be a very solid player and will probably be kind of the number one linebacker for this team. I imagine we might see a lot of Malcolm Rodriguez and Alex Anzalone kind of rotating between each other. Malcolm Rodriguez was really good for this team last year as kind of a later draft pick. So why they felt like they needed to get another running back or another linebacker, to me seems a little bit silly, because Malcolm Rodriguez and Alex Anzalone could give you very similar to what you're going to get from adding Jack Campbell in there. So as I said, not the smartest draft pick, but either way, you got three very solid linebackers who are going to be okay at defending the run and be okay in pass coverage. And then Derek Barnes is also a good athlete who can defend the run very well. He just has no idea what he's doing, in pass coverage, but he has decent athletic upside. And then Anthony Pittman and Jalen Reeves-Maybin also make this team. I imagine they're more just special teams players than anything, but they're here too. So overall, it's a decent linebacking group. You have three solid guys. None of them are stars, but none of these guys are liabilities either. And then when we talk about this secondary, this is a very interesting unit. You got 6 really good players, but none of them are truly stars or great players. The person with the most upside is either going to be Brian Branch or Kirby Joseph. However, how much is Brian Branch going to get on the field as a rookie? Not fully sure. So I'm going to say Kirby Joseph probably has the most upside. He's a really good safety. kind of cover, linebackers and wide receivers at a good level, but also is not afraid to come up and hit some people. So he's a good safety. Then having Tracy Walker, that gives you two really good safeties who can do a little bit of everything, and you can be real versatile with them. And then they got CJ Gardner-Johnson and Brian Banch, both as kind of safeties / slot corners. So they can really do a lot with these two as their nickel and dime backs. CJ Gardner-Johnson, as I said, is probably the best slot corner in the league. It's an absolute dickhead. He's one of those players that you hate if he's not on your team, because he's gonna be a good player, shut you out, and talk all this shit to your face. So he's a fun player to watch. Just an overall solid player. And Brian Branch, as a rookie, I imagine would be pretty steady for this team. And then your two outside corners are going to be Cam Sutton and Emmanuel Moseley. Cam Sutton has been a very solid player at his time in Pittsburgh. He's not some amazing, lockdown coverage player or anything like that, but he is a very, very solid corner nonetheless. And Emmanuel Moseley has been really good when he's played. He did get activated off the PUP list, but, he has struggled with injuries. But at least he was able to make it off the PUP list, so at least day one, you're going to have a good secondary. The depth with Jerry Jacobs, Will Harris, and Stephen Gilmore is fairly adequate with Jerry Jacobs and Will Harris. Stephen Gilmore is more of a special teams guy than anything. But, Jerry Jacobs and Will Harris are both solid cornerbacks for this team. And then they only have one other safety in Efetu Melifonwu. Obviously, they got two starting safeties and two kind of safety corner hybrids. So they don't really need a whole lot of depth. But, they got 6 really good players in the secondary, and they got some okay depth. So imagine this is going to be a good secondary. It is just lacking true star talent, to kind of take away true number one wide receivers and to limit some more explosive offenses. But 6 good starters, not a whole lot of teams have that. So I imagine it's going to help this defense a lot. So overall, when we talk about this defense, I'm mainly worried about the front 7 and what this defensive line is going to look like. And if they're going to be able to get after the quarterback at a decent level. They do have the potential to do so, but it's no guarantee. It really is no guarantee. But I do think we feel pretty good about this secondary, at least being solid, especially considering Aaron Glenn is a defensive back guy. So overall, as I'm saying, I think we're going to have good offense and hopefully good defense. So when we go and talk about their schedule, Vegas has their line at 9.5 and has them the favorite to win the NFC North at plus 145. So I do agree with Vegas that they are the best team in the NFC North and will win the NFC North. But as I said, with the Vikings video, I do think that they're pretty close to the Minnesota Vikings. So when we talk about their schedule, I do think that they're going to lose against Kansas City to open off the year, and then having to go to Baltimore, to the Chargers, and to Dallas. I think that is 4 pretty difficult games. However, I do feel pretty confident that they'll beat Carolina, Vegas, Chicago, and Green Bay at home. They should be Atlanta at home, and they should be able to take care of Green Bay, New Orleans, and Chicago in their own stadiums. So right there, I have them right about 8 wins between Seattle, at Tampa, Denver, at Minnesota, and at home at Minnesota. I imagine they'll win at least 2 of those. So I have them, at least at 10 wins. I do feel pretty confident about the over. My projection line only has them at 9.2, but I do feel pretty good about this team hitting the over. So as I said, I imagine they're going to at least 8 wins. And, to get 2 wins between the other, 6-ish games I have right there in the middle tier, I imagine it's very feasible. But as I said, I do imagine, as I said in the Vikings video, I do imagine that, week 18 against Minnesota could be the game to decide the division. However, I do trust that Detroit probably end up winning that game if that is the case, or at least they'll, be a game out ahead of the Vikings. So do I see this being a team that could win 13 games? Honestly, yeah. I do think this is a team that could vie for the 1 seed and really be a threat in the NFC when it's a little bit weaker this year. Do I really see them winning the Super Bowl? No. Do I see them making the Super Bowl? Not necessarily. I still do think this team has, some holes not necessarily holes to fill. They have some okay players that I think need to become good to great players. I do think this team's lacking a little bit of star talent. I would pump the brakes just a little bit, but I do think you feel pretty good about the Detroit Lions at least making the playoffs. I do think you feel pretty good about that at the very least. But are they going to truly compete for a Super Bowl this year? I do think they're just still a little bit limited. until more of these players kind of break out for him. So now we'll go ahead and kind of recap everything for you real quick. So obviously, as I said, with Dan Campbell, they have a super fun culture, and it was very huge to keep Ben Johnson here. It's really going to help this offense, and that's part of what made him so great last year. And then Jared Goff is a decent quarterback. He's in that kind of 14 to kind of 18-ish range of one of the better quarterbacks in one of the solid quarterbacks in the league. They have some fun pass catching weapons that do have some skill sets that work together. However, I do think they need a little bit more star talent, and without Jameson Williams, they are missing some of that diversity and skill sets. But they have a great offensive line that's going to raise the floor and ceiling of any offense. The defense is solid, but it does need some improvements from okay players to good players and good players to star. They do have some hard road games, as I said, at Kansas City, at Baltimore, at Chargers, at Dallas. So those games I think they'll probably end up dropping, but a lot of their games at home, are a lot easier. Like, Atlanta, for example. I said Carolina, I think they'll be able to win a lot of those games. But I do think week 16 through 18 will determine the NFC North, because they're going from Minnesota to Dallas to Minnesota. So I do imagine that they win, those games to win the division. But I think it's going to be close. As I said, it's going to be down to the last couple of weeks on who's going to win the NFC North. But I do think that, even if they don't win the NFC North, they'll at least make the playoffs, kind of like what I said with the Minnesota Vikings. So overall, this is still a very fun team. This is a team that I am rooting for, and I'm excited to see Detroit Lions playing football when it matters in January. So overall, if you are a fan of the Detroit Lions or any of these NFC North teams, let me know your thoughts. Let me know where I'm wrong in my analysis and where I'm right. We'll be back with the top 10 very, very soon. Thank you all very much for watching.